So, as I said before, in this 1 hour and a half, we start from the end user perspective, a perspective that we also analyzed in the first panel, mainly to understand its limits that are now quite clear, but we can add some more detail on this, and to understand how we could improve it to design and implement basically better digital self-control tools. And then in the next lectures we will move our perspective towards other actors, including designers and regulators. So this is the outline. We will have a brief overview of contemporary digital self-control tools. I will tell you how these tools are evaluated in the XCI community. We will spot some gaps in these tools. And finally, in another set of slides, we will try to understand how to design theoretically grounded digital self-control tools. So we will explore some theory that are highly relevant in the digital well-being topic, and that could be also maybe applied to your research interests as well. But let's start with digital self-control tools. So the last few years have seen a growing amount of interest around this topic, both in academia and also as off-the-shelf products, right? So what are these digital self-control tools? They are external tools, so basically dedicated apps or browser extensions that support users to self-regulate their technology use. So they are an app or an extension to control the usage of another app or of another website. I don't know if you already use some of these tools. Today, all our smartphones have some similar functionality. In Android, there is digital well-being. In Apple, there is screen time, right? Anyway, they typically allow users to track usage patterns through self-monitoring, basically. So I can see my statistics, and I can also define some interventions like a timer or a usage blocker or something like that. Again, these tools are common both in the research and commercial world. These are two examples. This is Habit Lab, which is actually a collection of different interventions for digital self-control that have been developed to study the effect of these interventions. And there are some papers from this that analyze this tool, Habit Lab, this framework in the XCI literature. And this is instead from the commercial domain. This is Forest. I don't know if you already have seen it, but basically there is this virtual tree that represents your time spent online or on the smartphone. And as long as you respect your limit, your usage thresholds, this tree is healthy. Otherwise, it dies. Again, there is this paradox. This functionality are now also present in those applications that typically creates problem for the digital well-being. And we discussed this in the panel. So for example, in YouTube, there are integrated features to set up a timer, to take a break from YouTube, and so on. And this is instead the digital well-being application on Android. But what are the characteristics of these tools? There is this very interesting article by Links and colleagues, who categorized all the functionality of several digital self-control tools that are available on Google Play Store and different marketplaces. And they created this taxonomy of intervention strategies that we now explore in detail. So most of the contemporary tools have some functionality that can be related to this category of blocking something or removing something. So in a way, blocking the interaction of the user with the interface. So they focus on blocking or removing distractions. So for example, people can block the usage of specific apps or websites, but also the usage of the entire device altogether. And this is the approach that is more common. So I set up a time limit of 30 minutes per day on my Facebook account. There are also tools that can remove specific distracting features within the service. So through this digital self-control tool, I'm able to, I don't know, let's say, remove the newsfeed from my Facebook and focus my attention on messages. So some examples of these strategies are usage timers and blockers, whitelists and blacklists of websites or mobile applications. So for example, this is a screenshot from an application that we developed in our research group to test the effectiveness of these interventions. And basically, this is a basic time limit that says you have reached your time limit on Facebook, and then typically you have the opportunity to respect the timer, so close the app, but you can of course also delete the limit or snoozing it. In this category, there is also the so-called friction design, that is introducing something in the interface, like an additional task, to make technology usage more difficult and discourage users to access the website, for example. I know that Rob in the past has explored design friction for one of his digital self-control tools. Could you please explain what was the idea in that tool?
Yes, so this concept was to change the level of the friction over time with users, and the measurement was done over, I think, several months. First making a small delay in some of the page content, then increasingly larger, either for the initial time of the page load or for elements within the page. So for example, we made YouTube loading slower, and then it decreased the quality of the YouTube video somewhat. Or they would load the page and it would take longer to load the initial page.
So the idea is to, in a way, create a barrier for the user to discourage, for example, mindless scrolling or something like that. So some practical examples. Both Google Digital Wellbeing and Apple Screen Time allow users to set up specific timers for specific apps. And when a usage timer expires, there is this warning or notification, and this is embedded on all the today's smartphones. And this is an example of friction. So it's a Google Chrome extension, Focusly, that allows you to create a blacklist of websites, and when you try to access one of the websites included in this blacklist, you are forced to type a series of arrow keys, in this case, respecting exactly this pattern to be able to access the website. So it's an additional task that should prevent you from accessing the website, especially unconsciously. Other examples, yes, there is this focus mode on iOS and Android to disable notifications. These are all examples of blocking or removing something. Mainly blocking. Instead, removing. This is an example specific for this category. The newsfeed eradicator, well, I don't know if it's still active, but anyway, it's Google Chrome extension that allows you to remove the newsfeed from your Facebook page and replace it with a motivational quote. And there are also extensions, for example, that remove suggested videos on YouTube. Okay. The other big category of interventions is related to self-tracking. As I said before, these tools typically allows you to see your statistics and to self-monitor yourself and your device usage. So there is this logging of usage data through this tool, and typically there are these pages that show some statistics, some charts that allows you to see if you are using too much your smartphone. So they make use of productivity dashboards with usage statistics and charts. So the user should self-evaluate himself and monitor the behavior with technology, and maybe decide what countermeasures should be adopted. Okay, I'm noticing that my time spent on Facebook is very high. Let's set up a blocker or a time threshold for the website. Also in Google Digital Wellbeing and Screen Time, there are dashboards, there are self-tracking options. And there are also commercial applications that allows you to track and visualize time spent also on laptops and also on different devices. So you have one single account and you can track all your digital ecosystem. Okay. Then there is another category that is, I would say, less common, that is goal advancement. So some digital self-control tools include features to encourage people to do the right task when they actually use their devices. So in this case, these tools can allow users to set some usage goals that may include goals related to technology use, but also goals related to the offline world. So for example, related to technology use, some digital self-control tools allow to set up some interventions in the form, I want to use Twitter at most half an hour a day. And then they encourage you to respect this goal. And to encourage users, they can use notifications, reminders, also with motivational quotes and sentences to encourage users to meet their needs. And this is an example from one of our studies. We will see it in detail in a minute, but anyway, it's an example of an implementation intention. So the user can define an intention that is linked to a specific context, and then the app encourage the user to follow this goal. So for example, here the context was during a business day in the morning between 10 a.m. and 12 a.m. Remember your goal, go for a walk. So I have this goal, I can set up in my application, and if I'm using Facebook in this specific context, the application encouraged me to follow my goal instead. Other examples of goal advancement, to-do book on the left, another Chrome extension that replaces Facebook newsfeed with a to-do list. And here time on the right is a to-do list which provides continual task reminders if the user leaves the app. So here in the context of to-dos. And finally, let's move to the less common category, that is reward punishment. So some digital self-control tools include features that reward or punish people for how they use their devices. And typically here gamification is included. And that's why there is forest here, because there is this gamification concept of a virtual forest that grows as long as I respect my goals. So the use of a device or of an app, of a website is linked to a score, and I can earn or lose points depending on my usage behavior on the device. And sometimes there may be the possibility to share scores with other users in the same community. Again, this is forest that grows virtual trees that may be killed if one device is used inappropriately. Interestingly, there are also tools that focuses on real-time reward and punishments. For example, TimeWast Timer takes money out of your bank account if you spend too much time on Facebook. Of course, you need to agree and provide your bank account, but then it takes you money if you don't respect your limit. And Pavlov lets you to automatically administer yourself some electrical shocks with a bracelet if you try to access, for example, a blocked website. This is not just for technology use. If you look at the website, it's also for unhealthy behavior and stuff like that. I don't know if it's still on the market, but again, it was a very interesting example. So how are these tools evaluated in XCI, basically? Recently, we conducted a systematic literature review on papers presenting and evaluating this kind of tools. And first of all, we discovered that collected measures in these specific studies typically focus on the usage of the tool under analysis, the blue bars, on the influence of these tools on technology use, like on time spent and on number of visits, but also on how these tools influence other user characteristics and feelings, like focus, stress, and addiction. The green bar here. And I think this is interesting because it also gives us some insights on what metrics we can measure when we deal with these kind of topics, to go beyond, for example, the screen time metric. And I've reported here some psychological scales that are typically used in these kind of studies to measure the impact of these tools, and that could be maybe relevant also for other research domain. Yes, the NASA TLX is well known in human-computer interaction and can be used to measure the cognitive load that is required to perform a task. So it can be applied to any kind of tools. But then there are scales that are specific to the digital well-being domain, like the smartphone addiction scale, which is validated questionnaires to measure, to evaluate the smartphone addiction using self-reporting. There is also a short version. The original version is 33 questions. There is also a short version, which is this one. And just to show you, these are the questions. So first question, I miss work that I planned due to smartphone use. From 1 to 6, where 1 is strongly disagree and 6 is strongly agree. I have a hard time concentrating in class while doing assignments or while working due to smartphone use. Strongly disagree, strongly agree. I feel pain in my wrist or at the back of my neck while using a smartphone. I wouldn't be able to stand not having a smartphone. I feel impatient and fretful when I'm not holding my smartphone. I have my smartphone on my mind even when I'm not using it. I would never give up using my smartphone even if my daily life were greatly affected by it, and so on. I use my smartphone longer than I intended. So you give this questionnaire to your users, you collect the answers, you compute the score for each user. There is a formula to compute the score. And then there are some indications on how to interpret this result, right? And typically what happens is, at least in studies evaluating digital self-control tools, is that you make users fill this questionnaire at the beginning before exposing them to the intervention. Then you give the intervention to the user, and after 2 weeks of usage, you ask your users to refill the questionnaire, and you see if there is a difference. So here, for example, in this paper, they evaluated this Nugu app, which is a digital self-control tool to improve self-regulation of limiting smartphone use, specifically for students, if I remember correctly. But anyway, they measured different metrics, including, of course, time spent, and then they compared before and after the intervention. So, for example, here is the average smartphone addiction scale values before the intervention, and here is the average smartphone addiction scale value after the intervention, after 2 weeks of usage, across all the users. And you can see that in this case, this number decreased, right? So hopefully the intervention application, Nugu, had a positive effect on this scale. And you can, of course, also perform some statistical tests to see if this difference is significant or not. And then there are also other scales, like the cognitive absorption scale, a scale to measure 5 states associated with deep engagement with technology, and also the general self-efficacy scale. This one is also quite cross-domain because it measures, it assesses optimistic self-beliefs and perceived self-efficacy to cope with daily activities and stressful events. Then you can specialize this scale to technology use, for example, in this case. And in our domain, basically, it measures how I'm confident in being able to use technology according to my needs and my values. Another interesting finding from this literature review was related to the experimental design adopted by researchers to evaluate digital self-control tools. And we found that most researchers adopt within subject designs, while between subject is less common. First of all, do you know the difference between within subject and between subject experiments? Okay. So between subject or between group experiments are experiments in which different people test each condition and each person is only exposed to a single tool or interface. So let's suppose we are investigating the effect of 2 different strategies, digital self-control 1 and digital self-control 2. We have 20 people that try number 1 and 20 people that try number 2. That's it. And then we compare the results. This is between subject. Within subject is also called instead repeated measures. So the same person tests all the conditions. So we have these 2 intervention strategies, and each person first tests number 1, then number 2, and then we see if there are differences. Can you guess what are the advantages or disadvantages of both strategies?
In within subject, this patient, no, the patient can learn the structure, and the second experiment would be less scientific.
Yes, there is a learning effect, right?
Between subject, the personal experiences can make differences, and you cannot test.
Yes. So the main disadvantage of between subject is the noise in your data, because different persons have different characteristics, and this can influence the usage of the tool, and that's why it's really important to balance your populations across the two conditions. The second one, instead, within subject, suffer from learning effects. So if I already know how the intervention is working, the second version will be easier to understand and interact with based on my previous experience. And that's why for within subject, you should always counterbalance your tasks and the usage of these applications. So, for example, half of your population will start with tool 1 and then will move to tool 2, and the opposite for the other half of your population. So there are methods to reduce this kind of disadvantages. So we found that the average number of participants involved in this kind of studies is 36, which is, I would say, quite low. And the most common type of evaluation is a 21 days control field study that follows a within subject design. So typically the digital self-control tools is deployed on participant devices. There is an initial week of baseline during which the intervention is in a way silent. It just collects usage data. And then there are 2 weeks of interventions during which the user can actually use the intervention strategies. And then the researchers compare usage data in the intervention phase with respect to the baseline week. What are the problems with this approach? So first of all, experiments are typically short, 21 days. So we cannot assess the long-term effects of using a digital self-control tool. These experiments rarely include a control group. So a control group is a group that do not receive any treatment, so that you can compare the behavior of this population with the population that actually received the intervention. And this is rarely the case in digital wellbeing research. And also, experiments rarely include a withdrawal phase. So a phase in which the digital self-control tool is maybe progressively removed at the end of the study. So we cannot know if the usage of this kind of tool can promote the formation of new behaviors. Because we are not testing if the behavior is persistent even if we remove the intervention strategy. And finally, there is also a strong selection bias towards young university students, and more generally towards technology-savvy users that use devices like PC and laptops every day. And we mentioned this in the panel, so considering cultural differences is very important, but at the same time is also a research gap in this research domain. And this is an example, I think, of a good experimental design, followed by Links and colleagues in this paper. Because it includes all the features to also test the long-term effectiveness of this kind of tools. So there are three three groups of participants. Two groups test an intervention strategy. The first one is go reminders. The second one is remove newsfeed. So basically, they developed two different Google Chrome extensions to allow user to set up some go reminders or to remove the newsfeed. And then there is the control group that received a placebo intervention, which was turning the Facebook background from light gray to white. So it's clearly a control group because we don't expect this to have an effect on users, clearly. Yes?
So this 5 months follow-up, is it defined just, I would say, as a result of the experiment, or it's just something, I'll say, approximate time?
No, this was the design for the experiment that they followed for in their paper. So they had these three groups. Then there were 2 weeks of baseline, 2 weeks of intervention, and 2 weeks of withdrawal. So for the two groups that experienced the intervention strategy, the researchers removed the intervention but still continued to collect usage data. And then there was an exit survey after 5 months to test long-term behavioral effects.
Can you say that this is a good design experiment?
Yes, yes, I think so, yeah. So, based on this, and also on the characteristics of the digital self-control tools that we have seen before, what are the main drawbacks in this end-user perspective, at least today? The first major drawback to me is that digital self-control tools are mainly based on a self-monitoring nature. So users themselves need to understand what are the causes of their problems, like by selecting which apps they would like to use less, by monitoring time spent, and so on. But doing this is not easy, right? So users may be unaware of the problems, and this is really problematic because users need to be constantly motivated in self-monitoring themselves, and at the same time deciding which strategies to adopt is not an easy task for end users. Because typically problems are difficult to identify and also to admit. And so digital self-control tools may not match user expectations. And that's why for this kind of tools we have a very high attrition rate. So users typically use these tools for 1 week, 2 weeks, and then they simply uninstall them. And as a result, these tools are not effective in the long term. There is this contradiction of using technology to block the usage of another technology. There is this focus on blocking negative behaviors rather than promoting alternatives. So they work in the short terms. When users stop using a digital self-control tool, their behavior tends to slowly come back to the previous levels of usage. So there is this lack of proactivity. Users must remember to use the tool and control their behavior. And we demonstrated this in the systematic literature review. We also conducted a meta-analysis based on the results reported in the paper under analysis. And we demonstrated that there is a short-term effect, but then this effect decreases over time. So from this, we started investigating possible ways to improve this kind of tools. And just to make some examples on this specific gap of self-monitoring, this was a digital self-control tool that we developed to be more proactive and intelligent in a way. We adopted a very simple machine learning algorithm based on association rules, really basic on the smartphone, to capture smartphone habits. So we will see this in the next set of slides, but an habit basically is a link between a context and a behavior, right? So there is a context, a specific context that triggers me in doing something almost automatically. So this very simple algorithm detected habits like during a business day in the morning, you typically use Facebook and Chrome together. Then this application warns the user about these habits with some pop-ups. New habit detected. Would you like to change it? And the user can ask, yes, I want to change it. The application makes the user explore the motivation that is driving his typical behavior. So why do you use the smartphone in this way? It's a way to make the user reason about their habits. And then the application suggests the users to define an alternative intention. So in the same context, instead of using Facebook and Chrome, I would like to go for a walk. I can set up my intention, and then the app automatically, proactively, every time the context happens and I'm using my smartphone instead of going for a walk, the app notifies me and says, okay, you should go for a walk instead. So it's more proactive because I don't need to self-monitor my habits. These are automatically collected and analyzed, and I can proactively intervene with some implementation intention, with an alternative behavior. Another gap is related to the complex digital ecosystems that in which we interact daily. Unfortunately, most of the contemporary digital self-control tools are single device, right? So they take into account the device on which they are installed. So a mobile app allows you to monitor the apps that are used on that specific smartphone. The same for browser extensions. But our digital habits are more complex for sure. So we own many devices. We often use more than one device at the same time, right? And so there is this problem. If I block Facebook on my on my PC, I can still access Facebook from my smartphone. So in our work, we conducted a qualitative study to understand how users perceive the importance of having a digital well-being that is spanned across the multi-device ecosystem they experience. So we conducted some interviews, and I think that this quote is really interesting because sometimes it happens also to me. So this user said that sometimes when I'm on Facebook on my computer, I take my smartphone, I go on Instagram, and then I unconsciously open Facebook too. So I have it open on my smartphone and my PC at the same time. And when this happens, I feel really addicted to social networks. So this clearly highlights that considering the whole ecosystem is important, and clearly highlights this gap in contemporary digital self-control tools. And from this, we asked them to imagine some solutions for having digital self-control tools that can be applied to different devices. And we also prototyped some tools with some timers and blockers that can be contextualized depending on the current device. Any questions? Yes?
Is there any digital self-control tool to customize the setting based on our needs, for instance, for our activities, maybe for our job or something like that. Is there any
What do you mean with customizing settings?
yeah, this customizing control settings
Mm.
based on our needs. Kind of, I don't know, maybe LinkedIn, so this is
Okay.
useful for job, or maybe, I don't know, some apps that we maybe kind of digital money that we
Mhm.
do something there.
I don't think so, but at the same time, I think this approach could be interesting. So last time we discussed attention capture dark patterns, and some of these patterns are strictly linked with settings, right? So for example, the autoplay features is typically activated by default, and it's really difficult to find that specific setting in the menus. So something that could allow you to more easily set up your settings could be an interesting approach, but I'm not aware of any tools like this. Okay. Let's open the last set of slides for today. Which is probably actually more interesting because it can also be applied to other domains as well. So let's focus on theories in digital well-being research. There is another critical gap in the current view of digital well-being and digital self-control, which we discussed during the panel. And this is related to this approach of equating digital well-being with user engagement, right? And screen time. And individual self-control responsibilities. Digital self-control tools are within this approach of individual self-control responsibilities, but at the same time we now know that measures like screen time do not reflect the variety of goals that we have and the different kinds of usages that we make on our devices and applications. And also, providing users with an indication of the screen time paradoxically may produce negative reactions, right? So, inducing the user to stop using the digital self-control tool. So this is a quote taken from one of the paper in the panel. Reducing engagement may not be sufficient if one does not address the deeper psychological problems causing problematic engagement in the first place. And for this, behavioral theories and constructs are needed to understand and address these problems. But unfortunately, one of the gaps of the digital well-being research, at least right now, is that this domain suffers from a theoretical gap. So most of the works, especially the works related to digital self-control, do not refer to any behavioral theory, and other works use a pick and mix approach, mixing together different theories, but then it's difficult to understand what is the real contributor. Anyway, there are some relevant papers that introduces some theories to be used as a lens to explore the digital well-being domain, and I've tried to include all these theories in this presentation. And the first one, probably the more common, is the dual system theory. Do you know what is the dual system theory? No? Yeah, it was probably mentioned in the second paper. Anyway, it's a theory proposed by Daniel Kahneman. This is a bestseller, so it's Daniel Kahneman is a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics that describe how our cognition works, right? So according to this theory, our cognition has two distinct types of thinking. One that is fast, automatic, and effortless, and one that is slow, analytic, effortful. So system one control is when our behavior results from habits that are almost automatic, unconscious. And these habits get triggered by external stimuli, the context, and also internal states, with no need for conscious attention. So for example, when you find yourself pick up your smartphone during any moment of downtime or during a lesson to check for notifications out of habit. This is system one. Or when you are driving and you realize that you don't remember the path that you followed during your driving session. So you have acquired an automatic habit, and now you perform almost automatically given the right cues. So there is a context that triggers a behavior. Then there is system two. And system two control is when our behavior is triggered by our intention, by our goals. So something that is in our conscious working memory. So for example, in the digital domain, if you have the goal of texting a friend on Instagram with a specific message, and you take out your phone to write your message, that's system two, okay? How is this theory related to the context of digital well-being and mindful interaction? I think mainly in two ways. The first one is mindless scrolling, unconscious smartphone habits are clearly connected to system one, right? And this is the first reason. And the second reason is self-control instead is to use our conscious system 2 to override automatic system 1 responses. So in a way, self-control is breaking this sort of automatic habits with our digital devices. So for example, you might have a goal not to check the smartphone during this lecture, and in order to do that, you might have to suppress your automatic checking habits that typically happens in this kind of situations. I'm bored, I'm sitting down, there is a computer, there is a boring professor that is saying something. Okay, let's check Facebook. Of course, sometimes we fail in doing that, and neuroscientists relate this to what they call the expected value of control, which is basically a cost-benefit analysis of what you might gain or lose from exercising self-control. Let's make some examples, but first of all, there are 3 different components related to the expected value of control. The first one is related to the amount of reward you can obtain or lose if you exercise self-control. So if I were to pay 1,000 euros not to check your smartphone during this lecture, it will be probably easier for you to actually exercise your self-control, right? Because there is this reward. The second factor is related to expectancy. So it also depends on how confident you are in your own ability to exercise your self-control. This is also related to self-efficacy. We have seen a scale for measuring it before. And finally, it also depends on the time, on the delay before you can get the potential reward. So if I tell you I'm gonna give you 1,000 euros not to check your smartphone during this lecture, but I'm gonna pay you in 20 years. This clearly have a less sort of impact on your ability to exercise self-control. So in our brain there is this sort of cost-benefit analysis around these three factors, and this determines if I'm able to suppress an automatic habit or not. So system 1 and system 2 competes to activate a given behavior. Yes, and what went out is sort of the behavior that gets the strongest activation in our brain. So what can we learn from applying this theory to contemporary digital self-control tools? This can be applied, of course, to technology use in general and to mindless interaction in general, but what about digital self-control tools? Well, we have seen that, first of all, problematic smartphone use is typically the result of unconscious system 1 habits. However, digital self-control tools mainly focus on our system 2, right? Because we are forced to adopt this self-monitoring approach. So it's system 2. However, suppressing this kind of automatic habits is not easy. It requires a strong motivation and external support. So that's why these tools are effective in the short term while I'm using them, but then when I stop using them, my behavior typically fall back to the prior to the intervention. Yep.
Sensory input with different condition can work different system control. Right? For example, like I'm making a test. This test is private, just I'm seeing it. Probably I can just answer without any consciousness. But if this is public, if my friend will see it, there's some reward and rules that I need.
Yes, sure. Yes, exactly. Then the context is a complex domain to be explored and a complex thing to take into account here. And being able to understand exactly what are the contextual factors that triggers a behavior, it's clearly difficult, and we are not neuroscientists, so
more than context, then like it's also include environment.
yes, the environment is also a contextual element, right? So everything can be context, even our feelings. So the question is, how can we design better digital self-control tools, going beyond this self-monitoring strategy? And this is an interesting model proposed by Pinder and colleagues. It's not directly related to digital well-being, but it's related to digital behavior change interventions, to change any kind of behaviors, okay? Also eating behaviors, sleeping behaviors, and so on. And this habit alteration model, it's a model to describe how habits can be created and disrupted through technology. So it's a conceptual model to simplify the application of behavioral theories to digital behavior change interventions, including digital self-control tools. Again, what is an habit? Is a consistent repetition of behavior in the presence of stable contextual cues. And this repetition increases the I'm not able to pronounce that word. Yeah, something like that. The fact that it's automatic. So as long as I perform this multiple times, there is this behavioral cycle that ends up in creating this sort of automation. So the model describes behavior as a construct that is influenced by a set of contextual cues. And these contextual cues can be divided into behavioral impulses, system 1, and deliberative intentions, system 2. So there is this filter phase in the model in which we perceive some context, and we have these perception filters that translate this context into behavioral impulses and intentions. And this is the filter phase. So external cues from the context and internal cues, our feelings, for example, are perceived by the user and filtered through a set of conscious and unconscious attention filters. Then there is the prepare phase. So the filtered cues are matched to potential responses. And again, according to the dual system theory, these potential responses can be, again, system 1 impulses or system 2 intentions. And finally, there is the act phase. So impulses and intentions are stacked in a sort of potential response stack. And so these potential responses compete to become a single response. And the important thing is that the behavior that win function as a feedback, creating this sort of behavioral cycle. So if we want to break an habit, clearly we want to act here on this part of the chart, right? Blocking something in the system 1. At the same time, if you want to promote the formation of a new habit, we need to focus on this part of the graph, and we need to make users repeat the action until it becomes automatic. Anyway, how can we use this model? We can use this model to imagine different ways of intervening in this behavioral cycle, right? And in the paper, there are a lot of examples from the eating domain. But anyway, this can also be specialized to the digital well-being domain as well. So for example, we can try to intervene in the filter phase, right? For example, we could focus on altering the context by adding or removing cues in order to affect which impulses and intentions arise in the potential response stack. And there is an example here. Let's imagine that we have a person that is experiencing unhealthy snacking behaviors. So the context is the user is in front of the TV and there is an unhealthy snack on the table. And so this context creates the temptation to eat the snack. So a solution here in this specific point of the model is to maybe replace the snack with a healthier alternative, so that the visual cues is different. We can also work on altering the cue saliency. I think it's similar. No, here is more using cognitive bias modification techniques. Yes, to train the user to recognize unhealthy snacks. For example, I don't know, a serious game, here in the example, to pair images of their problematic snack with something they find revolting. So we alter the saliency of the cue. The next time the user will see this snack, probably this impulse will be lower. We can also act in the prepare phase, and in the paper there is this example of non-conscious goals. There is also an example about subliminal priming. So presenting to the user some cues, even if they are not directly noticed by the user, to create a sort of non-conscious goal for the user. yes, I think it's in the paper, but there is this example of an intervention that displays a subliminal image of a healthy snack to the user. So this image is not perceived by the user, but in a way they argue that this could create unconsciously an effect. And finally, we can intervene in the prepare phase. Also, no, sorry. Yes, still in the prepare phase, we can use just-in-time reminders. So this is quite understandable. We know the context, so we know when to act, and we send some reminders exactly when the context is happening, right? And we can also train self-control. So again, using some serious game to train the self-control of the user. And finally, we can intervene in the act phase. And here is where self-monitoring is placed in this moment, in this model. So I would say that these kind of interventions are less effective than the previous ones. Exploiting this model, we try to develop a theoretically grounded digital self-control tool, which was mainly based on the concept of and the importance of learning how to use a device without the need of a digital self-control tool. So this application monitored the user behavior with the smartphone, as in Socialize, the previous app. But instead of notifying smartphone habits, it suggests learning paths. What is a learning path? It's a sort of game in which there is an intervention, but the intensity of this intervention is progressively reduced based on the achievements of the user. And the idea is to support the user in being able to sustain the new behavior without external support. So typically, this intervention is really strict at the beginning, and then its intensity decreases over time. Just to make some examples. This was a learning path to make the user aware of the time the user is spending on the smartphone and allowing the users not to use the smartphone in specific context. And this learning path was divided into 4 different levels. The first level asked the users to put an unusual object like my wallet on the smartphone so that the context is altered in a way. I know that there is this specific object on my smartphone because I don't want to use the smartphone right now. And then if I'm able to respect this intention in specific contexts, the intention of the intervention is slightly decreases over time. So in level 2, the app asked me to put the object near the smartphone. Then it asked me to put it in my field of view, and then no need for the object as long as I'm able to respect my intention. And you can clearly go back and forth between levels depending on your behavior on the smartphone. But again, the idea is to promote this long-term behavioral effect. And again, here are some examples of the interface. There is self-monitoring, but then there is also proactivity. The app suggests me some learning paths. I can activate these paths and then the levels are displayed, and there is a sort of gamification in the app. So we exploited different points in the model to create a digital self-control tool that go beyond self-monitoring. Okay, this was the dual system theory. The other theory that is sometimes used in the digital well-being domain is the self-determination theory. This is one of the most frequently used and well-validated theories in HCI, and basically it provides a minimum set of requirements, of well-being requirements, that can be applied to all technologies, regardless of the context. So again, this is something that can be applied to other domains as well. And the theory defines 3 basic psychological needs. The first one is autonomy, so acting in accordance with my goals and values. Competence, feeling able and effective, and relatedness. So this is more related to the social sphere, feeling connected to and involved with other users. This can be used in different ways. We will see some guidelines for designers next week that are based on this theory. But it can also be, in a way, linked to the field of digital self-control tools. Because basically, self-determination theory says that motivation ranges from amotivation, so a lack of motivation, to intrinsic motivation, my internal desires, with extrinsic motivation in the middle, so something that is motivated by an external reward. And clearly, as Lukov and colleagues said, digital self-control tools in this range can be linked to extrinsic motivation and is based on an external support. So it's like I have to use the digital self-control tool to improve my habits. In the same paper, they suggested this opportunity to shift this perspective and try to move towards intrinsic motivation, so towards I use the digital self-control tool because it's fun. If we reach this point for the user, clearly the tool will have a stronger effect. So designers have the opportunity to create digital self-control tools that are towards this end of the spectrum, and this means that we need to move from the current view of the problem and the current solutions, which are based basically on timers, on blocking the interaction, towards solutions that instead envision new interaction paradigms. Okay, I don't want to block the interaction. I want an interaction that is respectful in terms of digital well-being, without the need of blocking you, right? Okay, finally, there is this sense of agency construct. It's not really a theory, it's more a construct, but it has been associated very recently to the digital well-being domain as a new lens for understanding this problem instead of using screen time. So what is the sense of agency? Basically, it's the experience of controlling my actions, and through my actions, the events in the external world. So it's a sort of subjective experience of control, and that can typically be divided in 2 sub-constructs: sense of agency and judgments of agency. So sense of agency, or also feeling of agency, is the in-the-moment experience of being in control. So it's a subjective experience. Judgments of agency, instead, it's a post hoc judgment of my sense of agency. And most of the digital wellbeing research area is here, right, on the judgments of agency. Judgments of agency, for example, with respect to the time that people spend online. So it's not something that happens in the moment, it's a sort of judgment that I make on the time I spend online. These judgments are typically measured in XCI through the experience sampling method. I don't know if you are familiar with this evaluation method. Yeah, basically, you ask users to fill some questionnaires, some questions during the day, right? In the real context. So, for example, you can develop a mobile application to deliver experience sampling that asks users twice a day, I don't know, are you satisfied with your current Facebook usage or something like that. So you can use open-ended questions. You can also use the sense of agency scale. And you can also create custom scales or questions like in this study to measure sense of agency related to this application. They asked their users for this switch tube use, how much did you feel out of or in control? From 1 to 7, 1 very out of control, 7 very in control. This is for measuring judgments of agency. What about measuring the sense of agency? So the in-the-moment experience of being able to control my actions. And this is a relatively underexplored domain. There are two perceptual phenomena that can be measured that are assumed to be correlated with agency. And the first one is sensory attenuation. It is based on the observation that self-caused stimuli are experienced less strongly than stimuli that are caused by an external factor. And the other phenomena is temporal binding. So typically, events that are causally connected are experienced as closer in time than unrelated ones. So for temporal binding specifically, we can actually measure the time interval experienced by the user between an action and the result. And if this time interval is short, this means that the user feels in control of the action. And there are two main strategies. One is the Libet clock. So during an experiment with the Libet clock, participants estimate this timing of their actions looking at a rotating hand clock. But this, of course, requires visual attention. When the visual attention is important, you can also use interval estimation. So participants judge the duration, typically in milliseconds, between two events. And from these judgments, you can understand if the user feels in control or not about their actions. And if you are interested in these methodologies, here is an example of an application of interval estimation in the generative AI domain. Basically, they studied how generative AI influence the sense of agency of the users when the user creates an image with the AI. So, of course, sense of agency is important for digital well-being because, first of all, supporting user control is a common principle in XCI design guidelines. It is demonstrated that a low sense of agency over technology use predicts negative life effects. And also feeling in control of my action is integral to autonomy. that is one of the three universal basic human needs in the self-determination theory. So it's clearly relevant. So we can think beyond screen time and use this sense of agency as an alternative lens for addressing user frustrations. Of course, we want to promote this sense of agency without reducing necessarily the time spent online. So there is this opportunity to promote instrumental use rather than habitual use. Okay. And to conclude this lesson, this is an example of an interesting study that explored sense of agency in the context of digital well-being. So they conducted some experience sampling and some interviews to understand what are the design features of YouTube that make users experience a low sense of agency or a high sense of agency. And basically, sense of agency in this study depended on whether participants felt like they had agreed to the actions of the app. So, for example, participants felt more in control when they planned their sessions, like with the playlists. And also, another finding was that the accuracy of the algorithms also has an influence on sense of agency. For example, recommendations that are irrelevant to the user clearly have a negative influence on sense of agency. And based on this, they developed and tested this interface, SwitchTube, that basically compared two different versions of what they called adaptable commitment interface. So the first version, the focus mode, is a version of YouTube that just have the search bar without any recommendation. The switch version instead allows users to switch between the explore and the focus mode, where the focus mode is this one and the explore mode contains all the recommendations. And they actually found that the switch version is the one that has a greater impact on sense of agency. So this demonstrates that removing something is not always the best solution possible, but giving the user options to customize their digital experiences within the app according to their needs could be a relevant alternative to removing everything, right? Okay. We finished the theories. I don't know if you have any questions. Of course, we don't have time to cover in details all the specific theories and constructs, but maybe you can use this lecture as a starting point if you want to maybe also apply some of these concepts to your research domains.
Thank you.
Okay, if you don't have any questions, we can stop here for today, and so see you in a week. Next week we will address the designer perspective, so we will have 2 hours roughly on this perspective, and then we will have the second assignment that will be an heuristic evaluation. So you will be asked to apply some heuristics that are some guidelines for the digital well-being to an existing product, okay? And you will evaluate this product against those heuristics. But I will give you more detail next time. Thank you.